Welcome to the Functional Relations Podcast, where we set aside time to have engaging conversation. I had to swallow halfway through.
Yeah, man. Just take a deep breath before, so you're gonna.
Okay. Welcome to the Functional Relations Podcast, where we set aside time to have engaging conversation on relevant topics related to behavior analysis. I'm Zachary Bird.
And I'm Caleb Davis. Zach, what's going on?
Caleb, not a lot, really. I'm just doing my normal thing. I just put young Cooper to bed, and now I'm here talking to you. What's up in your life?
Not much. I'm actually on vacation this week, so I got a little bit of extra time.
What have you been doing with your extra time?
Doing a little golfing, taking up golfing recently.
Oh, that's a very hard sport.
Yes.
And expensive.
Yeah, that's good though. It's fun.
Yeah.
You got to have hobbies, right? Yeah. Have you been working on anything?
Well, ever since COVID-19 took over our lives, I started baking sourdough bread like every other person. And or it seems like a lot of people took it up.
I was going to say, I haven't made any sourdough bread.
Okay. Well, I think the reason why people are doing it is because it takes like basically a full day to do it. So if you're home, you can just, do the stuff you need to do to make a good loaf in a day. But if you're going to work, it's basically impossible to make it. So I think that's why people are making it now. But I have to admit, the first loaf I tried to make was just so dense. It was like a brick.
Yeah, is it making sourdough bread? Is there a fine art to it? Little room for error.
I like to think of it as a science, Caleb. I'm sure there are lots of artists who, make artisan bread, but I think of it as a scientific endeavor.
All right. So your first loaf came out like a brick. That seems like a problem. Did you do anything?
It was a problem.
Did you do anything to correct that? Have all your loaves since been bricks, or have you made some adjustments?
Oh, we made lots of adjustments. I can report after 4 months of baking sourdough, I'm getting a nice looking loaf. I might actually, this is a good thing. I might put up a picture of my sourdough loaf, my most recent sourdough loaves. I'll put a picture on our Patreon page for our Patreon listeners. They might, I don't know. They probably aren't interested, but
maybe we have some bakers out there. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? But yeah, so I made a lot of improvements. Mostly, I think I capitalized on this repertoire I had that was to solve problems.
Okay, right. So you said your first loaf was like a brick. And so
it was awful.
That's a problem. It's a huge problem in the making sourdough bread world. So
Absolutely.
What steps did you take? How did you solve that problem to end up where you are now, which is making lovely loaves of bread?
Bird's Bakery. We just hung the shingle yesterday. No, but I did the thing I often do when I have a problem. I got onto Google and I typed my problem into Google and the results gave me some answers to the question that I had about the bread being too dense and making adjustments to make a better loaf. And so over time, I just kept kind of doing that. So the first loaf was too dense. So I searched something about the loaf being too dense. Then the next time it was too flat. And so I took the same exact strategy, which was to jump into Google, look at YouTube videos, read up on it, and solve that problem. And then so after a while, you solve 5 or 6 problems using essentially the same formula. You're able to come up with a much better tasting and looking loaf.
Oh yeah, that's cool. I'm sure a lot of people out here do that. I know I use YouTube all the time to figure out how to do things. So
maybe you're golfing.
Definitely hit up YouTube for my recent golfing hobby. So when you're presented with a problem in these situations, you don't really know the answer, but you've sort of like learned this strategy, which is just type it into Google and presumably you'll be presented with some information that will allow you to adjust your baking behavior, I guess, in this case, to hopefully improve the product, right?
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
Like, so this skill set, this repertoire of like problem solving, have you ever taught clients, similar things?
Oh, yeah, interesting question. I don't think I really have. I think that's an area where I could really grow. I think with a lot of my clients with kind of more advanced skills, there's probably some problem solving that we work on, but I don't think I've specifically been like, okay, I'm going to teach problem solving and then gone out and done it. So I think that's an area where I would be really interested to learn more about and maybe be able to kind of add that into some of my programming. That would be interesting. Have you ever taught anyone?
Me? No, actually, I haven't. And I think probably one of the reasons why is most of the clients I work with don't have like what you just referred to as like more advanced skill sets.
Yeah.
But I do know that, behavior analysis has and does look at these skills like problem solving. There's researchers out there that have done a lot of work in this area, and actually it's a pretty interesting area to think about.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think we should probably find someone who's really knowledgeable in this area and then learn more about it. I think this would be a great opportunity. What do you think?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right, let's go.
Hi, Judah. Welcome to the Functional Relations Podcast. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Caleb. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah. So today we're discussing...
Oh, you're welcome, Judah. Yeah, don't worry about Zach. Yeah, okay. Well, it's good to be here with you too, Judah.
Oh, Zach, are you still involved in Functional Relations Podcast? Oh, yeah, there you
are. It's fine. Zach will be fine. So again, thank you for joining us, Judah. Today we're talking about the topic of problem solving. So to start out with, in simple terms, could you describe how you would define a problem?
Sure.
Dr. Judah Axe is an associate professor of education and behavior analysis at Simmons University. He conducts research on verbal, social, and challenging behavior. He's also on the editorial board for 5 behavior analytic journals. And he's the former chair of the Verbal Behavior Special Interest Group through ABAI.
I like to use and I've based this work on Skinner's definitions of it, and as well as David Palmer and Donahoe, but mostly Skinner and Palmer. And we define a problem as an antecedent situation. So it might be motivating operation and discriminative stimulus that often may evoke behavior, but there is no behavior immediately available at a given time to reduce, as Skinner wrote it, the deprivation or aversive stimulation. So that's the main way to define it.
Okay. So then if we were going to define problem solving, how might we do that?
Yeah, and one other piece important to put in the definition of problem is the behavior is in the person's repertoire. They have the possibility of engaging in it. If you ask me to fly, oh gosh, that's a problem. But yeah, kind of not, because flying is not in my repertoire. I've never flown before. But if you ask me what's 2023 plus 57, I might not have the answer immediately available, but I engage in some problem solving to arrive at it. I've never been asked that, but that sort of behavior is in my repertoire. So problem solving is engaging in behavior. Another way to think of it is supplementing and manipulating discriminative stimuli that produce additional discriminative stimuli that ultimately evoke the solution behavior, or the behavior that will solve the problem and produce reinforcement. with some kind of synonyms for problem solving are precurrent behavior, where current behavior is saying the answer to that math problem. Precurrent behavior is writing out the steps of it or typing it into a calculator. Mediating behavior is another way to talk about that. Or I also like to talk about it as problem-solving behavior. So you have an antecedent situation that's a problem. You engage in problem-solving behavior that supplements, produces discriminative stimuli that ultimately evoke the behavior that solves the problem, also known as the current behavior.
Oh, that's helpful. I feel like it's helpful to get those definitions kind of out of the way right up front. I think now what might be helpful is if we kind of walk through some of the research that's been done in around problem solving.
Sure.
Yeah, so in your review paper, I noticed that there were actually 5 different types of problem solving that you guys mentioned. So if we could just start with the first one, this is behavior chaining. Could you give an example of this type of problem solving?
Yeah, this one comes up as we review it in a study by Neef and colleagues with teaching solving math word problems. And so solving math word problems can be really hard for a lot of students. And the researchers taught the participants to engage in a chain of behaviors, which were things like underline the type of problem is or the operation. So whether something is added or subtracted, and you underline that, and you decide if it's adding or subtracting, and then you write the math problem out to arrive at the answer, and then that current behavior of writing the answer into the answer box. And so it's engaging in a chain of those behaviors that is the consistent frame of the chain, but the particular numbers and names and variations of a certain problem vary each time.
Oh, that's really interesting, yeah.
Yeah, so it's almost like you could create a task analysis of the steps of solving a problem using kind of like that formula.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, they put it as a type of task analysis, kind of 4 steps or so that you do toward solving the problem. But unlike a task analysis, say for hand washing, the actual behaviors are going to be different every time with problem solving because it's a different problem. You don't always push down on the soap dispenser. Sometimes you write a 3 and sometimes you write a 5. And sometimes you underline has and sometimes you underline take away.
Right.
So it's going to vary every time. That's where it's problem solving a problem. You don't have an immediate answer. You don't say the teacher says wash your hands. You don't go through the steps of washing your hands. You're engaging in some of those additional behaviors to arrive at that final behavior.
Nice. Yeah, that's a great clarification.
Yeah. The second type of problem solving that you described in the paper was rules self-questioning and self-prompting. Do you mind just kind of walking us through what an example of that might look like?
Yeah, and maybe it's funny that we put slashes through those because they're kind of different names for somewhat the same process. But one study that I reference a lot that I really like and was the basis for some of the research that I've been doing is by Park and Gaylord Ross from 1989. And so they worked with adolescents with intellectual disabilities who were working at a job where they were dishwashers at a restaurant, for an example, and they were interested in their social behaviors while they were washing dishes, right? Chit-chatting with others, and while they're on a break. So in the break room, talking to their colleagues, coworkers, anyone else. And so they're interested in their social initiations and responses and how much they mumbled. And so they taught the problem solving and the self-questioning was showing them a situation and a picture such as someone approaches you at work, what should you do? Or a client approaches you at work, what should you do? And they taught the participants to ask themselves or emit 7 behaviors, many of which were self-questions. So the first question was, what is happening? And so they taught them to ask that, and then again, a different problem each time, so a different answer. In this case, it would be someone is approaching me at work. And then they taught them to ask, what are 3 things I could do? And I like to say, if we were doing this today, it might be I could say hi, I could look at my phone, I could walk away. Right? Couldn't do that in 1989, but you can now.
You could look at your phone, but it just would not be very interesting. It would just be over there on the wall.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Feel like the Zach Morris phone, like the massive one with the huge cord or whatever on it.
Right. Yeah. I remember looking at the different circles on the rotary to see which letters were in each circle. Okay. Right. That's just me. And so what are 3 things I could do? And then the next question is, what would happen if I did each one? What would happen if I said hi? What would happen if I looked at my phone? What would happen if I walked away? And it might be, they might say hi to me, or if I walked away, they might yell after me or something like that. Hey, I was talking to you. And so it was kind of answering those questions. And then it was choosing one of those alternatives. So which one? Picking one, emitting it, so doing that one, and then asking yourself, how did I feel about how that went? And so it was engaging in those self-questions, asking the questions, answering the questions, engaging in the behaviors to then arrive at that final current social skill or social behavior of giving someone a greeting, for example.
Neat. Yes. Yeah,
I really like that. I think it would be really hard to teach that. It's a lot of steps. We all go through that instantaneously, right? When we're in a social situation that we're not as comfortable in, maybe like, oh, I could go up to those people, or I could just wait a couple minutes, or I do that at least, but it's instantaneous when we do it. And so to teach it as specific task analysis, like Caleb said, to individual disabilities would take longer, but the idea with lots of practice, it could get almost as fluent as it does with all of us.
That's really neat, because I was thinking the same thing. Like, it's really quite complicated, but those social situations are complicated, so it's not surprising that you have a complicated series of steps. Yep. The next one you guys mentioned was visual imagining, which is the one that was something that really stuck with me. Tell us about that one.
Sure, yeah, that's a favorite of mine also, and one I've used in a study that I've been working on. And so a good example of this, actually, one fun one I'll say, there's a few examples in the literature. One that was done by Ruth Ann Rayfelt and her students. And this was with teaching spelling to students with learning disabilities. And the procedure was they were given a difficult word, like spell connoisseur. Zach?
I cannot do that. Starts with a C.
Yeah, Caleb?
Not here.
Right. We interesting thing, we could engage in many different problem-solving behaviors to arrive at that. What would you do if I said spell connoisseur and I'll Venmo you $10?
I would start with C-O-N.
I'd be Googling it.
Yeah.
Googling it something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So we Google to problem solve all the time, but in their study, they taught the students to connoisseur, and then when they were teaching them how to spell it, and okay, I don't know how to spell it either. Let's go with the word like cat.
That's better. Yeah.
Spell cat, and so they'd say C, and they had them draw it kind of in the air with their finger. You can see me, but I'm doing this with my finger, drawing a C, and then an A with my finger in the air in front of me, and then a T. And they could draw that out and see the word in front of them, in a sense, the invisible word.
Yeah.
And maybe they saw it in their head, close their eyes and draw it and see the word. And then taught them to do that with a bunch of words. And then, on the test, they were able to engage in those precurrent behaviors of the finger spelling the word and the visually imagining the word, which helped them, be able to spell more words on the test.
Nice. That's cool.
Yeah.
As you're describing these different strategies, something that's interesting, I think, is like a lot of these types of problem solving behaviors seem like they're often covert.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like, what are your thoughts on like the distinction between overt and covert behavior when it comes to like the studies that you've reviewed on problem solving?
Yeah, absolutely. What I've found is that some examples of problem solving occur at the overt level, like writing out the answers or solving a math problem, right? I write down 43 plus 29 and I add the ones
Show
column.
your work.
And show my work. That's right. In the Neef et al., the chain study I said, that was pretty observable overt. Someone could observe and verify that the student was engaging in those precurrent problem-solving behaviors, but the visual imagining, not so much, right? And interestingly, the self-questioning one may start out at the overt or observable level, but then kind of fade to the covert or internal level, right? I might ask myself, what are 3 things I could do? And then as I get lots of practice with that, I might just kind of do those in my head, right? And so all of that is a part of radical behaviorism. Skinner said we can analyze behavior, whether it's outside or within the skin, using the same operant principles. Palmer has elaborated a lot on that notion, saying there's really not a distinction whether I say, well, 9 plus 3 is 12, 2 carry the 1, that you can hear it, or if I say that in my head, I just did it.
Yeah, I couldn't hear you.
That those are both behaviors, they're both products of their consequences and discriminative stimuli and motivating operations. It's just one is observable to more than one person, one's observable only to one person. And, I think that a lot of people I've talked to would say, hey, if you can't observe it, it's not part of behavior analysis. It's not worth putting in an ABA study. It's not worth teaching. But I strongly disagree. I think that to be functioning individuals, we do a lot of that thinking, that problem solving in our heads, and we can teach our students with disabilities or any students that we might be working with to do that. And I think a big idea is first at the overt level, say it out loud, and then attempt to bring it to the covert level when appropriate, which it is for a lot of cases.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next one, we're gonna dive a little deeper on that, how to teach people on that a little bit in a few minutes here. But the fourth one in the paper was, I say we, it was not me at all. You and your colleagues. The fourth one was recombining units and improvising. Could you give us an example of that?
Yeah, and I'd say interesting that I think there are, by most ways of looking at it, fewer examples of this in the literature in terms of problem solving, but there's a great one by Nancy Neef and students. And so I love this study. It was a situation where you have a child, say with autism, who uses PECS, Picture Exchange Communication System.
Oh yeah, I love that one.
And a situation where, say, I'm a child with autism, I have my PECS book right in front of me, and I've got all sorts of icons like cookie and truck and bubbles and jump on the trampoline and all these fun things I can ask for. And then I go to a friend's house, and that friend has, if I was a 5-year-old, I'd say a He-Man toy with the chest that would spin around, making it look like you could punch the chest. All right, you with me? And so I don't have a He-Man icon because I don't have He-Man figures at my house or at my school, so nobody's ever put that in there. So I don't have that icon. How can I ask for that He-Man doll that I really want to play with really badly? And so I think that's a situation a lot of people see when working with kids with PECS. And so what they did was they didn't use He-Man, but they used, for an example, a VHS cassette tape was one item, and a sausage was another item. and let's see,
I remember the marshmallow example was one that sticks out.
Marshmallow, yeah, thank you. So say those are a few of the things that the student has an EO for, wants demand for, doesn't have the icon, but they've got icons of different colors and different shapes and different functions. And so they taught them to ask for, with the VHS tape, I don't have the icon for VHS, but I want play black rectangle. Right? And with the marshmallow, I want eat white circle. And so so I have experience with I want and play and eat, those function words, and different shapes and different colors. And so now I've got a novel thing. Like I've never asked for a marshmallow before. I've never had a marshmallow. And you put a little piece in my mouth. Oh, that's good. I want to ask for more of that. And so I have to look at my icons and look at the item and say, okay, I want eat. It's a thing you eat, and it's white, and it's a circle. I want to eat white circle. Here's my sentence strip, Zach. Can I have some more marshmallow? I love that. So that's that's cool. Example of problem solving with recombining those minimal units. I've learned those different units, and now given this novel stimulus of a marshmallow, I'm putting them together in a new way based on that prior learning.
Yeah, that's awesome and seems super valuable for kids, like you say, that communicate using PECS or some other augmentative communication system. Hey, sorry to interrupt, but if you're a BCBA or BCABA and interested in getting a CE for listening to this episode, you can purchase it at functionalrelationspodcast.com. This episode is worth 1 learning CE, and you'll need to provide 2 code words when you go to check out. The first code word for this episode is farm. There was a bunch of different animals on the farm. Farm. F-A-R-M. Farm. The fifth and final problem-solving method that you folks talked about in the paper was sorting, sequencing, and tacting. Could you give us an example of what that looks like?
Yeah, and so that was in a study by Frampton and Shillingsburg. And so they were teaching children with autism how to explain how to engage in certain activities, like bowling was one example. And so they had different picture cards with the different steps of bowling, like set up the pins, throw the ball, and shout hooray, and set the pins up again, and the parts you do when you're bowling. And so they had them sort. So that was the problem, was to explain to your friend how to do bowling. If your friend asks you, how do you engage in bowling? It's like, I've bowled before, but I don't have that repertoire. I don't have the behavior immediately available to explain the steps. And so the problem-solving behaviors were sorting the cards in order, tacting them as I go along. So here's the first, I set up the pins, then I walk back, then I throw the ball, then I jump for joy. And going through those pre-current behaviors then produce that current behavior of explaining how to engage in that activity.
That's awesome.
So that was kind of like the recombining minimal units improvisation. That's the only one study I know of that did that way. So I think that there's some kernels of ideas for more practice and research using those methods.
Yes, good point. So now that you've gone through all those different problem-solving methods that have been demonstrated in the literature, for practitioners that are listening to this, why do you think that they should consider using some of these problem-solving methods within their everyday practice?
A big reason that I like to talk about is that I think of the range of functioning levels of our students, and a lot of us work with nonverbal, minimally verbal, early identified, or just on the more severe end of spectrums students. And for those students, we have to do direct teaching with Mann's with tax. So we hold up a picture, we prompt and prompt fade for them to say what it is. We do simple interverbal, and so what's your name? Prompt and prompt fade around saying their name, and there's often a one-to-one format. It's not there's not a problem inherent there. But I think as we work with higher and higher functioning students, which I like to say maybe you who are listening are not working with students like that right now, who are, say, in inclusive classrooms in public schools, who can read, who can do math, who are have some social skills. Maybe they're Asperger type students. If you're not working with those type of students now, you might someday. And I've worked with those students, and I think that problem solving, that idea, that notion of teaching in that way represents a whole world of ways that we can teach students to solve those problems, whether they be academic or social, vocational, and those sorts of things. So one example of a study that I've been working on, which I think has an immediate translation to practice, is teaching students to recall past events. And so lots of parents and teachers and people working with students with disabilities want them to be able to say, what do you do at school today? Or tell me about your weekend, and to get a large number of answers, not just played or nothing or something like that. And so my students and I combined two of the strategies we talked about to teach recalling past events, which was visual imagining and self-questioning. And so we did an activity. We took a picture of ourselves doing it, like bowling, for example. And it was a different activity every time, so that it had to be a problem, right? We couldn't do bowling every day, or you just say what you were reinforced for yesterday, but that wouldn't be solving the problem. And so we took a picture of it, and then 2 hours later, we showed them the picture. We told them to close their eyes and see the picture, or see the room, and ask and answer 7 questions. Who was there? What was there? What's one thing that happened? What's another thing that happened? What's a third thing that happened? How did I feel? And how did Zach feel, who was working with me during that? And so we did prompting and prompt fading and reinforcement to ask and answer those questions, which then generated more answers that they would give when asked them, tell me about what we did during that activity. And so we were able to increase the amount of things they said from 0 or 1 before we taught them to use that strategy to 5, 6, 7 pieces of information about the activity towards the end, which was really nice. And I think that that's a sort of skill that lots and lots of people can work on, and a type of intervention that lots and lots of people could use. And I think that's just one of many examples. Throw out one other social skill example is we often teach greetings, right? And actually greetings has always haunted me as a learning target, because I can't count or think about the amount of times that I'd be walking around the hallways of a school and a therapist or a teacher would be one-on-one with the child, and I would approach, say hi, and okay, hi, and they greet and they say okay, great, and move on. And I never saw that faded. I never saw the prompt faded. And I think a lot of that has to do with what's in it for the student to say that, what sort of positive reinforcement there is. But, we need to kind of prompt and prompt fade the greeting early on. But then we get to a point of kind of like that social situation of, well, here's a classroom full of students, and who can I go say hi to, or can I play with you, right? And so you go up to a student and prompt fade, can I play with you? But it's not always so appropriate to go up to a person and say, can I play with you? Maybe they're playing with someone else at the time, or maybe they're cleaning up the materials at that time. And so it's engaging in those problem-solving behaviors of looking at the situation and asking some of those questions of, Is the person already playing with someone else? Are they cleaning up the toys? And, based on the answers to those, I'm going to go to someone else, or I am going to initiate to that student. And so I haven't seen that in ABA programs, that level of teaching and thinking about what's involved in those difficult social repertoires. And I think that we should be doing more and more of those in practice.
Yeah, I agree. And that's really interesting. It's almost like you're just saying we can bring our teaching to a new level, right?
Yeah.
One of the criticisms of ABA has always been it's too simplistic. You're not teaching complex skills. Dr. Axe is on this podcast today saying, yeah, you can. And so go do it. I'm putting words in your mouth, but
no, those are the right words.
Judah, if somebody was thinking about, like, maybe they have a client and they're wondering if problem solving would be like a good skill set to work on, what are the prerequisite skills that you think are important that somebody has before you would consider working on teaching problem solving like what you've been describing?
Yeah, that's a great thing to think about and not too well defined yet. By and large now, you kind of know it when you see it. But I think it's, I guess, having, in a sense, those current behaviors in your repertoire, having a history with those, being able to do those, being able to ask a question, answer a question pretty fluently, being able to, the visual imagining one, right? It's, what's a prerequisite for visual imagining? Well, we've tried some screening procedures with that. So it would be, show someone something, okay, take it away, say a picture of the Taj Mahal, say close your eyes and tell me what you see, or maybe it's something more simple like a school bus. And so maybe just going through those behaviors of closing your eyes and saying it, and maybe doing that an hour, 2 hours a day later, is some indication that they can do that skill, right? You'd obviously need strong tact repertoires and intraverbal repertoires. Let's see. Yeah, you think of the chains required to solve those math word problems. Can you do all those things? Can you, underline when you're asked to underline? Can you do those, math problems without it being a word problem? And answer questions about greater and less than, things like that. So yeah, it's kind of, you have a lot of the skills in place, but you haven't put them together to solve these types of problems yet.
That was a great question, Caleb. I think that, it's complex, but I think you broke down some of the skills that might be necessary. The thing about this season of this podcast is that we're trying to get folks lots of resources. If someone was interested in teaching problem solving, do you have any resources that might help someone get started or to learn more about it? Because we can put those things in our show notes.
No.
Okay. All right, great.
One resource I can think of that's old, but no person better to learn this topic from than David Palmer in his 1991 chapter on memory and problem solving. It lays out a lot of these concepts and how problem solving is such a huge part of our everyday behavior. So that's a good resource. I've talked about problem solving on a couple other podcasts, such as ABA Inside Track and the Behavior Babe podcast.
Nice.
Kind of similar things. If you attended to this one, you won't learn much, more from listening to those other ones.
If they see you in the, ABAI's handbook, maybe you'll be presenting some of those in the next few years.
Yeah, so a student and I will be presenting a problem-solving study that has to do, that I didn't really talk about yet, but has to do, we mentioned it, but the idea of Googling it, right, is the way many of us, most of us, all of us, solve problems every day, is we Google it, we ask Siri, or we use phone apps. And so a student and I did a study on teaching adolescents with autism to answer questions about planning a trip or geography type questions by looking up the apps, such as how far is Charlottesville, Virginia? What time is it in San Francisco? My daughters, for some reason, are all hepped up on Hawaii, and they ask me every day, "What time is it in Hawaii?" And I usually say, if we're eating dinner, they're eating lunch. And so what time is it, or what time is it in Cairo, Egypt? I think again, none of us. Not many of us could rattle that off unless we have a cousin in Cairo or something like that. And what's the weather like in Rochester, New York, if I'm planning a trip or something like that. So using the weather app, the map app, and the clock app. And so we taught them to use those apps to answer questions like that, which is a good kind of geography skill and kind of a social skill with planning a trip. And I think lots of extensions to practice with bus apps and movies and sports and news and things like that. Some of those, again, once coronavirus is over, but
Judah, what are some common problems that can maybe happen when you're trying to teach problem solving, either like in your own experience from conducting research or just in studies that you've checked out in the past?
Yeah, I think there's one big one that is really important, which is motivation. And so, with recalling past events, for example, with tell me about your day. So, I've seen that problem with kids with autism and related disabilities. With my 6-year-old daughter, again, when coronavirus wasn't happening, but when she was going to school, I might at dinner time say, "How was your day? Tell me about your day." And I get, "It was fine," or "I saw my teacher." One little answer. I said, no, tell me about it. What'd you do first? What'd you do next? What'd you do 12th? What'd you do? I want the whole story. Tell me. And, well, oh yeah, we did that. I don't get very much. But if I said to her, tell me 5 things you did at school today, and you can watch a half an hour of whatever show you want to pick, she'd be like, "All right, I got it." We did opening meeting, and then our teacher read us, Dr. Seuss book, and then we did some math problems using manipulatives, and we had snack and recess. I pushed my friend Tim on the swing at recess. I'll give you as many details as you want. So I think in some of the research I've been seeing is, it's a can do. There's both can do and won't do. Whether you have the skill and the motivation, right? A lot of those strategies I talked about is like close your eyes, ask and answer 7 questions. Any of that you won't get unless there's positive reinforcement involved, right? So in one of the studies I did, you see on the graph, session 48 added a prize box, and trying to, beef up the motivation. And so I encourage anyone embarking on this in practice or in research to just, or, this or anything that we're working on with students, ensure there's positive reinforcement, ensure there's motivation for engaging in the behaviors. Problem solving isn't magic that, you only need that. You don't need positive reinforcement anymore. No, you have to be motivated to, solve those hard problems, right? Math word problems, screw you, you solve it. It's you need some strong motivation to go through all those steps, I think. So that's, to me, that's the biggest challenge, and something that we have to keep thinking about when we work on this.
Cool. No, that's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up, Judah. Are there any other things that you haven't talked about today related to problem solving that you think would be valuable for our listeners to think about?
I think you've asked all, hit on with your questions, hit on the main things I like to talk about with this. I think just echo something Zach said, a way that you said it, is that from a more academic conceptual standpoint is, most people would say that behavior analysts can't work on those more complex things. We can teach the simple antecedent behavior relations, but we can't teach difficult things like problem solving. And really think of Bloom's taxonomy. Discrete trial teaching is really good at the first couple levels of knowledge and comprehension, but what about application, synthesis, evaluation, problem solving? Can get at some of those with that, the PEC study. You have to synthesize your prior learned behaviors to solve this current problem. And so we can do those things as a field, and we should be doing those and teaching those more complex. I think, I kind of the reason I said this before when I've talked about this, I think sometimes behavior analysts don't see the relevance because they're often working with more students at the more severe levels that they couldn't benefit from this. But I think a lot of us work with the higher functioning population, or we work with people who work with the higher functioning population with special education teachers and so on, that we should be working on this, the adolescents with Asperger's and so on. So we can use behavior analysis to teach complex skills. The Skinner and Palmer's analysis of problem solving is, I think, the key to getting there, and some of the applied research that's come out of that.
All right, welcome back, everybody. This is a time in the episode that we wanted to set aside a little bit of time to show our appreciation for all the people who support us.
Yeah, Caleb, we've had a great few months here for season 2. If you're listening closely, you might notice that our sound sounds so clear, so crisp. Why do you think that is, Caleb?
Yeah, we got some fancy new mics, thanks to our supporters.
Yes. One of the things that we had been saving up for, over the last several months is we've been saving up for some new mics, and they just arrived just in time for dropping this episode. We wanted to make sure that we were really taking the opportunity to thank people for allowing us to upgrade our hardware a little bit, because hopefully we can bring a better product from here on out with these new mics. In fact, I wanted to mention that we had a few new Patreon subscribers. A couple of them were actually loyal listeners, which if you can actually go check out our webpage. On our website, we have a page specifically designed to thank our loyal listeners. And so this month, actually, we have 2 new loyal listeners, Aubrey and Rob. So we want to say thank you. And because of your support, we were actually able to invest in some new mics to hopefully make our podcast a little bit better.
Yeah, we really appreciate when listeners leave reviews on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, or comment on our social media pages such as Facebook or Instagram. You can also send us emails if you have anything or any feedback. That's functionalrelationspodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, and if you wanted to jump in and support us on Patreon, we would really appreciate it. This is one of the ways that folks can support us in more tangible ways.
For those that don't know, Patreon is a website that allows listeners to access behind-the-scenes posts, bloopers, updates, and we also send out small gifts to members to show our appreciation. And you can learn more about becoming a Patreon member at www.patreon.com/Functional Relations Podcast. And we'll be sure to leave the link in the show notes. So if you're interested, go ahead and check that out after you're done listening.
Yeah. So anyway, thanks again for everyone who supports us. We really appreciate it, and we couldn't do it without you.
Absolutely. All right. So let's hop into discussing the interview. What were your thoughts, Zach?
I really enjoyed it. I really appreciate that Dr. Axe took the time to come onto the podcast and hang out with us a bit and teach us about problem solving. That was pretty cool. And I feel like he was a wealth of knowledge when it comes to that topic. And it's something that I really hope that I can kind of use more in the future, because I think it really addresses the concerns about ABA not being able to teach complex behavior, right? Do you think that's right, Caleb?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's think it's a really neat topic too. So we actually think I think people maybe talk about problem solving. Like I think it's not just like a technical term. I think often people who maybe aren't really familiar with behavior analysis, everybody talks about problem solving, right? It's something like very common term. But I think what's really cool and what I like talking about in this episode was like really breaking it down from like a behavior analytic scientific approach. Like what is problem solving when we're talking about that? Like what's involved in it? And like even discussing like what are the prerequisite skills? Like what does somebody need to know how to do to be able to ultimately solve a problem? And I think that that's just kind of a neat topic.
Yeah, I think that is something to kind of bring up quickly, which is just like, because problem solving is a complex skill, we want to make sure that the folks who we're teaching, that we don't forget that we still need to have all those foundational skills. And so we don't want to throw out all of our other strategies we have for teaching people, but this really adds some additional kind of level. It kind of like levels us up to be able to teach these more advanced skills of problem solving. So that's pretty cool.
Dr. X described a number of different problem-solving strategies that were sort of outlined in the review paper that he published along with some of his colleagues. Were there any of those strategies that you thought were like particularly interesting and that sort of like really sparked your interest?
Yeah, well, so when I was thinking about kind of like with folks who are listening to this episode and they kind of want to take something from this episode to say, oh, I'm going to go try that. I was thinking like teaching, recalling past events was something that sparked my interest. I was like, I've worked on that a bit in the past, and I think I've done some pretty good things with it, but I really like the way that Dr. Axe mentioned it. Do you remember his procedure about like showing pictures? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think the procedure is basically showing pictures, but then also teaching somebody to ask questions to themselves.
Right,
so like
imagining it. Yep.
Yeah. The whole strategy of visually imagining, I remember like the first time I heard of it, I was just like, that sounds really interesting. And it's kind of unlike a lot of the behavior analytics stuff you typically would.
Yeah.
In some ways, like as soon as you hear visual imagining, I feel like every behavior analyst maybe at first thought is like, well, how the heck would you measure that? Or something like, you know what I mean?
Right. Yep. I think that's a very common reaction.
You kind of have to be okay with like, I don't actually know if they're imagining, but I'm teaching something that procedurally you can be like, that's what you call it, right?
Right.
It's like these procedures that are designed to teach you to do this, even though we can't directly measure it. Like,
yeah, in one condition, you tell people to visually imagine, and the other one you don't. So that's the variable that's like, even though you're making the assumption that they're imagining, they might not be.
Yeah.
But it works. So
yeah, right. You kind of, and it's not your primary dependent variable. It's your independent variable is the things, the prompts, the like showing them a thing. That's all your independent variable, and your dependent variable is being able to like produce some like answers or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
It's really cool. I mean, I think people who haven't, I would definitely encourage you to go check out the research on it. It's a pretty cool topic and seems very helpful in teaching. Because I think we all do that. Like we all use visual imagine. Like I know there have been times where I'll be thinking back to maybe like a larger meeting that I was at. And I was like, who was at that meeting? And I will kind of imagine going around the table and be like, I remember I saw this person was sitting next to this person. Well, who's sitting right next to them? And then but
right. Yeah.
I think that's behavior that most of us engage in. And it's helpful, right? It's helpful for us. So why not be able to teach that skill to clients to help them be able to utilize it as well?
Yeah. So I think that would be a great thing to get out and use in practice. So anyone listening, go do that. That's fun. That's cool. And people will be impressed. So you get all those kudos, You mentioned something to me right before we started recording, and I think you should talk about it here, which is the idea about positive reinforcement. Dr. Axe brought it up in the episode, but Caleb, I thought you might be able to share it with all the listeners. So can you remind me again what that was?
I think this is related to how Skinner defined a problem, right? So a problem is
right.
where there's a state of deprivation or aversive stimulation that there isn't an immediate way to relieve that deprivation by, contacting positive reinforcement, or, in the case of aversive stimulation, engage in some behavior to have that in some way relieved. So without those things, there's really no motivation to engage in any problem-solving behavior. I think this is important because if we're hoping to teach problem-solving behavior,
right,
we need to ensure that there are sufficient motivational variables in place, right? So ensuring that there's a strong establishing operation for positive reinforcers. Also, if there are aversive situations, we want to make sure that we're teaching somebody a way to problem solve to have that aversive stimulation removed, or at least that's kind of the way I think about it. I don't think we really talked about in the episode negative reinforcement, but certainly I know personally I engage in problem solving. If I'm in an aversive context, I might engage in some behavior to figure out how to have that removed. Does that make sense, you think?
What are some examples of that with problem solving that we might be teaching our clients or our students?
With individuals with autism, there may be aversions to certain things like loud noises or busy environments, things like that. I could see the benefit in teaching in those situations. Maybe you teach those strategies like asking questions like, where could I go? What could I do? As prompts to then, I don't know, I could put headphones on. I could go for a walk. I could ask somebody to be quiet, or again, I'm just kind of like making this up right now, but I think that certainly those would be situations in practice where essentially the motivation is aversive stimulation, and in those situations, problem solving sometimes needs to occur.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that makes sense. I like how you brought it back to the kind of problem-solving definition, because I think that good educators and good behavior analysts are always considering, like, what is in it for the student to be answering these questions or to be working on this problem for me. It has to benefit them in some way. And so I think that that's a really good point and a good way to kind of bring it back to where we started, baking my sourdough bread and, improving your golf game, Caleb. How are we going to do that? I heard that you're going to be in a tournament in the fall. So that really creates some motivation to get better, doesn't it?
Certainly, yeah. If you know you're going to be playing golf in the upcoming future, that creates some motivation to want to engage in some precurrent behavior.
Yeah, right. Hey, everyone. If you've been listening to this whole episode and you're interested in getting a learning CE, the second and final code word is soda. Everybody likes to drink soda because of all the little bubbles. SODA, soda. When you finish the episode, head over to functionalrelationspodcast.com to purchase your learning CE. Oh, and also if you're in need of ethics CEs, you can get 2 ethics CEs for any of our episodes from season 1. Yeah, so anyway, this is a good episode. Thanks, Caleb. This was fun. Thank you to Dr. Axe. One thing I think listeners should know, if they are interested in maybe learning from Dr. Axe, Simmons University in Boston, where Dr. Axe is a professor, they have a fully online program and an on-ground program for master's students. And then they have a PhD program, which Caleb and I have gone through. I graduated with a PhD last May, and Caleb is finishing up his dissertation actually in Dr. Axe's research lab. So if you want to learn from Dr. Axe, great opportunity would be to apply to some of those programs. They're great programs. We know firsthand.
Yeah, absolutely. And on a different topic, just a reminder, we are offering continuing education units for this episode. So if you're interested in purchasing some CEUs, you can head on over to functionalrelationspodcast.com and you can purchase them right there.
Yeah, that's right. And don't forget about Patreon. If you want to become a member, you can go to patreon.com/functionalrelationspodcast. We'll make sure to put all of the literature we've talked about on this episode in the show notes as well. Caleb, is there anything else?
No, just that I would definitely recommend that people go check out some of those articles. If your problem is that you don't know enough about problem solving, the first step you can take to solve that problem is reading literature on problem solving.
Yeah, that's right. Some
So we're helping you out. We're teaching you a problem solving strategy right now.
Yes. Let's check out the show notes. And that's it, I guess. We'll see you guys next month with a new episode. Thank you, everyone. See you, Caleb.
See you later.
Yeah.